All right, we're coming back to Daniel, and now we're going to go through it a little bit. And what I've found is people are edified by the whole thing, and I keep taking for granted that everybody knows everything and they've seen it all before, and I'm going to take it as if that's not the case. Um, so, going through this, we talked about the 70 weeks. The scope is Jerusalem and the holy people, and it is a focus on their prophetic destiny that has 490 uh, years left, determined upon the holy people and the city at the time that Daniel received the vision. And it consummates with the anointing of the Most Holy, which is the temple that will be, or at least the site of the temple that will be uh, the site that will be established for the temple, the most holy of the temple for the memorial in the millennium. We talked about how there is a memorial temple in the millennium described in Ezekiel 38, and it's every bit as detailed as the one that is detailed in that David received blueprints for. And they've built scale models of the thing and everything. This is not figurative. This is a literal temple that will be in Jerusalem, and out of it will proceed the river uh, that will be a healing to the land. Um, and why will it need to be healed? Well, probably because there will be have been nuclear events and all kinds of pollution and everything. Uh, the first, I would say, 100 years of the millennium are going to be a time of restoring and healing. Uh, so if you want to know about that temple, the vision of the new temple is in Ezekiel 40, and that is literal. And God brought him to a high mountain in the land of Israel and set him on, in which there's a frame of the city on the south. And I don't have time to get into all that, but you can look at that. And 40 and 41 describes this huge temple where sin offerings will not be made, but burnt offerings will. What are burnt offerings? Burnt offerings are a picture of the devotion of Jesus Christ to the Father. All the other offerings were sacrificed, all the other offerings were accepted on the altar because of the burnt offering. The burnt offering, I would say, if you want to know that Jesus loves you, you look at the cross. But if you really want to know that God likes you, look at the burnt offering and understand it, because the burnt offering was presented to the Father for his inspection and his satisfaction only. And it was the first offering in Leviticus before any of the other offerings are mentioned. And the reason is because the blood of the burnt offering was sprinkled on the altar 7 times, and the altar became most holy, so that everything that touched it became most holy. And the altar therefore had the power to the power, I guess you want to say, to sanctify the gift. All the other offerings were accepted on the altar because of the blood of the burnt offering. The burnt offering's blood sanctified everything, was sprinkled on everything in the tabernacle and made it holy. The burnt offering was flayed and cut into pieces, and the inward parts, the intestines and the head and everything, was set on the altar before God for his inspection. So, as if God's vision could penetrate to the very depth of this offering and see all the inward parts. And of course, this is a picture of Christ, and it meets his approval. And the burnt offering, the fat of the burnt offering, was offered up as a sweet smelling savor to God, which caused God to draw near. It's why God was drawn, at least in type, to the tabernacle. There was a savor, an aroma that the Father was pleased with, and that aroma represented the absolute devotion of Jesus Christ to the Father in everything he did, everything he said, from the very depth of his being. He loved the Father with all of his heart, soul, mind, and strength. You know, you say, oh, I love God. No, you don't. Jesus Christ loved God with all of his heart, soul, mind, and strength. He is the pattern. He's the mold. He's the standard of the law. he's more than the law. The law is a shadow. He's the reality. The law points to him, and he is the real righteousness. And he loved God with the entirety of his being, not just during his earthly life, not just every minute of it, but from eternity to eternity. He's never done anything that was not pleasing to the Father, and he's the beloved Son in whom the Father is well pleased. And when he offered himself up as a burnt offering, he was giving himself to the Father out of love, and that was a transaction between the Father and the Son that has nothing really to do with any of us. That was, nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. He gave himself and surrendered himself entirely to God and was accepted by God as well-pleasing. And if he had just done that, it would have been a sacrifice of love to the Father. But it's on the basis of that, the sin offering, the trespass offering, the peace offering, the meal offering, all the other offerings are accepted. It's based on he loved righteousness and hated iniquity. And to love righteousness is to love God himself. And only Jesus Christ knows God. Nobody else knows the Father. Only the Son who's in the bosom of the Father has declared him. And he lives so perfectly unto God that he said, when you see me, you've seen the Father. He said, I do nothing of myself, only the Father working in me. All my speaking is of him. All of my moving is of him. I am fully surrendered to him. And that life is a pleasing aroma to the Father, represented by the fat portion that was burned. And so the blood of the burnt offering and the fat portion of the burnt offering, which was burned, was accepted to God and went up to him as a sweet-smelling savor, right? This is the basis on which we're accepted in the beloved. In Ephesians 1:6, where it says, we are accepted in the beloved. The beloved Son of God is the burnt offering. And Paul says in 2 Corinthians, we are a sweet aroma or a fragrance of Christ unto God. That means that aroma that pleases God so much that he delights in his beloved Son is in us, going up to the Father. And that's what, when we come to the Father, we come in his beloved Son, and we come with the fragrance of the beloved Son. So we don't come just with the blood, which testifies of his cleansing us of sin, but we also come with the burnt offering, the fat, the fragrance, which testifies that the Father is pleased. I'll be right back. Sorry, I got interrupted. Somebody was looking for the TV remote. Anyway, that burnt offering that will be offered during the memorial of the millennium will be a testimony to the Lord's perfect obedience to the Father, and why the Father is well pleased with him and him in us. And it's the basis of the kingdom is the Father's good pleasure. The good pleasure of his will is to give us the kingdom. It's his good pleasure to give you the kingdom. And so it speaks of the Father's delight. It is not a sacrifice for sin. It is not a blasphemy. Like the Antichrist temple in the 70th week is a blasphemy. Why? Because they're going to be in unbelief offering a sacrifice for sin, which they shouldn't do because it just shows they don't believe in the blood of Jesus Christ. But the priesthood during the millennium is a memorial priesthood, like a museum, okay? And it's for the purpose of offering up, there will be burnt offerings to teach the Gentiles, and we talked about this in the last thing, that there will be mortals born during the time of the millennium who will need to understand. They'll need to be told what were things like before the tribulation. We can't understand what things were like before the Garden of Eden, before we got cast out of the Garden of Eden. Well, they won't be able to understand what things are like before things were restored to the state of the Garden of Eden. They're going to be in a paradise. How are they going to understand sin and death and all the wicked things we see every day? They won't. So there has to be a testimony. And that's what that temple's for. So when he says anoint the most holy, he's talking about the temple that Ezekiel has already prophesied. Ezekiel prophesied that while they were still in the land, before they were sent to Babylon. Where's my Bible at? Okay. So, but there's this river that goes out of the temple. It's 3 chapters. Wow, okay. And that river is mentioned in Zechariah 2. Zechariah as well. That there will be, the Mount of Olives will be split open, and the river will be for the healing of the nations. Let's look at that real quick. And it's like a picture of the river, the water of life in the New Jerusalem. It's not quite the same thing, because that river, the water of life, is the life-giving Spirit that comes out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. But it is a healing water that will heal the land. Let's see. Oh, geez. River. That's gonna. Okay, so he says, this is talking about remember when Jesus said in Matthew 24, which we'll study, but he talks about in Matthew 24 when they said, what will be the sign of your coming? And he said, you need to watch when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Let him who reads understand. Then let him who's in Judea flee, right, to the mountains. Well, here it says in Zechariah 14:3, I will gather all nations to Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be shaken, the houses rifled, women ravished, and half the city shall go into captivity. The residue of the people will not be cut off from the city. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations, as when he fought in the day of battle, and his feet shall rest on that day on the Mount of Olives. Now, if you remember the angels, when he ascended to heaven, there were 2 angels standing there, and the disciples were looking up at them, and they were watching him ascend, and he disappeared. And the angels said, why do you keep staring? He's going to come back the same way he left. Meaning, when he returns, where does he go? He's going to eventually stand on the Mount of Olives. His feet shall stand on that day on the Mount of Olives, which is where he ascended from. Before the and by the way, the Olivet Discourse, that's where he gave the prophetic message in Matthew 24. That Mount of Olives is really important to the Lord. So it's before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives, he says, will cleave in the midst thereof, in the east of the west, and there will be a great valley, and half of the mountain shall move to the north, and half of it towards the south. There's a big earthquake, and that earthquake shows up in Revelation. I believe that's the earthquake that happens at the same time the 2 witnesses are raised from the dead in front of the whole world after 3 days of lying dead in the streets. They're resurrected when there's this great earthquake in the city of Jerusalem. That earthquake causes the Mount of Olives to split in half, and it happens when he sets his foot on the Mount of Olives. And in that moment, they flee to the mountains. Now, I don't know if he's going to stand in that day. It says in that day he's going to stand. I guess there's a gap between when the Antichrist... No, I guess this is another secret coming. When the Antichrist is manifest, the Lord himself is going to show up for the children of Israel, for the believing remnant who are watching, who have kept his word who've listened to the 144,000, and they know that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. They are paying attention to Matthew 24, and they know to flee to the mountains at the abomination of desolation, so that when the man of sin is revealed, the mountain splits and they flee. And he says, you shall flee to the valley of the mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach to Elzeel. You shall flee like as you fled from the earthquake. There's that earthquake. In the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. And the Lord my God shall come, and all the saints with thee. Now I believe that we'll be with him. And it shall come and pass in that day that the light shall not be clear nor dark, but it shall be one day which shall be known to the Lord, not day nor night, but it shall come to pass at evening that it shall be light. And it shall be in that day that living waters shall go forth out of... Now he's generalizing here. One of the things about prophecy is that when it talks about the day, it's talking about the day of the Lord. Now the day of the Lord is 1,000 years, and it begins with a night. And the night, if you understand Jewish days, Sabbath, the evening and the morning was the first day, right? The evening and the morning was the second day. So the day begins with the evening, and the evening is the tribulation. It's dark for the world, but for the children of Israel, it's who are believing, the remnant, that light is rising on them, and Christ is shining on them. But they're now in the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord begins with wrath for the world, but it's salvation for Israel. And obviously for us, who come with the Lord. So somehow there's some mystery in here that we don't fully understand. I'm not going to pretend to understand it. But don't assume this is all one 24-hour period. The day of the Lord is 1,000 years. The millennium is the day of the Lord, okay? And it begins with the tribulation. So even this sounds like it all happens at once. And that's sometimes how the prophets wrote, is they wrote as if all these events happened at once. And yet there's time between the events. And we're going to look at a chart that kind of shows that. But he says, it shall be in that day that the living waters shall go forth from Jerusalem, half of them from the former sea, and half of them toward the hinder sea. And the summer and in winter shall it be. And the Lord shall be king over all the earth. And in that day there shall be one Lord, and his name one. And the land shall be turned as the plain of Gibeah to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem, and it shall be lifted up and inhabited in her place, and from Benjamin's gate to the first gate. Basically, he's going to terraform Israel, whereas Israel will be exalted above the nations. But he says, this shall be the plague whereof the Lord will smite all the people that have fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall consume away while they stand on their feet. Their eyes shall consume away in their holes. Their tongue shall consume away in their mouth. And that sounds like if you ever watched Raiders of the Lost Ark, what happened when they opened the Ark. That's exactly what it looked like. But Chuck Missler always said that sounds like what a neutron bomb, if it went off, would do. This is something supernatural that the Lord does, right? But he says, it shall come to pass in that day that great tumult from the Lord shall be among them, and they shall lay hold every one upon his hand upon his neighbor. So the people are going to fight against each other, and rise his hand against his neighbor. And Judah shall fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the nations shall be gathered, gold and silver and apparel in great abundance. And he'll plague all these animals that'll come against them. And it shall come to pass that every one that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem will go up from year to year to worship the King and the Lord of hosts, to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. See, there will be at least one feast. And at that feast, yearly, there will be a memorial burnt offering at the literal temple out from which this river proceeds. And it'll be on top of this mountain. And it shall be that whoever will not come up of all the families of the earth to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain. If the family of Egypt not go up and come not, they'll have no rain. There will be a plague, where the Lord will smite the heathen that come not to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. That shall be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all nations that do not keep the feast. So this is during the millennium, right? That he's ruling the nations with a rod of iron. It is a strict rule. And apparently there will be some rebellions along the way. And we know that at the end of the millennium, there's a final rebellion, which is why he has to have a memorial feast to teach them the good pleasure of God and why all this exists and what happened. Because if you were born during that time and you're still a sinner, because the Gentiles are not going to have the new covenant the way the Jews do. That is specifically for the house of Israel and Judah. The Gentiles don't partake of it. They partake of a blessing because in him all the nations will be blessed because his kingdom will be there. But I don't believe they're going to have the kind of holiness that is promised to the Jewish people at that time, as is evidenced by the fact that he's going to have to rule them with the rod of iron and issue punishments for nations that don't come up for the feasts, which means, the new covenant says, I will keep them in my ways and they will not depart from them, right? The new covenant has a feast that they keep even. And he says, I'll cause them to walk in my statutes and ordinances and they will keep them. That is for Israel. The covenants are for Israel, not for the nations. We are not a covenant people as the church either. We are a testament people. I don't have time to get into all that, but there's confusion about this when people allegorize away Israel and take away their literal future. So I'm exploring these scriptures just so you can see that this is all very literal, right? And in that day shall there be upon the bells of the horses holiness unto the Lord, and the pots of the Lord's house shall be like bowls before the altar. Yea, every pot in Jerusalem and Judah shall be holiness in the Lord of hosts, and they shall sacrifice and shall come and take care of them and see therein. And in that day there shall be no more Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts, no more mixture, no mixed multitude. It will be pure Israel. Now this is real. This is literal. It's not allegorical. This is not talking about heaven. This is talking about a real kingdom when Christ the King rules with a rod of iron and inherits the nations per the Davidic covenant that was promised to him as a seed of David and as the Son of God. And there will be a river that goes out of this temple, and it will heal the nations. Living waters will go out of Jerusalem. Let's see if there's another. Maybe that's in Ezekiel. In Ezekiel 47, it's been a long time. Sorry, that's like 8 chapters worth of time spent on this temple that is literal. But he talks about the water that issues out of the threshold. And there's an angel that measures it, and it's getting higher and higher. And the charismatics like to make that into talking about swimming in the Spirit and everything. But this is literal water. And it says, everything that lives, moves, wherever the river shall come, shall live. Okay, and there's a great multitude of fish because the waters to come there, for they shall be healed. And everything that lives where the water comes, this is resurrected water. Remember, in the tribulation, when the bowl judgments and the seals go forth, a third of the sea, the plants and the sea. We'll look at some of that later, but he said if he didn't come back, no flesh would be saved, right? And you get this idea that everything's going to be so destroyed, and it's so sad, and all the animal life and all the fish life in these terrible catastrophic judgments that are coming down during the Great Tribulation, which Jesus said there has never been anything like it in the history of the world, nor shall there ever be. Well, what's he going to do? Well, the first thing he's going to do is he's going to set up the temple, and there's going to be a river flowing out that has healing waters that will bring to life the fish of the sea, but the miry places in the marshes shall not be healed, they'll be given to salt. And the river of the bank on this side and that shall grow all trees for meat, whose leaf does not fade, neither does truth. He's restoring it like Eden. It shall bring forth fruit according to its months, because the waters issued out of the sanctuary. The fruit thereof shall be for meat, and the leaf thereof shall be medicine. He's going to restore the whole earth like Eden. It's going to be glorious. Okay. We're kind of on a tangent, but I just wanted to say that this stuff is literal. And when Daniel says that to anoint the most holy, he's talking about, the Jewish people had these glorious visions from their prophets of what God was going to do in the latter days. And what he's giving Daniel a vision of is, when are these things going to come to pass? Because Daniel considers himself as the president. He's the president of Babylon. He considers himself cursed, right? He'd rather be in sackcloth and ashes, mourning for his people and identifying with their sins, and go so that he could go back and participate in the building up of Jerusalem. Because why? He is captured by the vision. And it's just like Abraham, who he sought a city whose builder and maker is God. Builder maker. In Hebrews 11, it talks about how they all had a vision that led them, that was their faith. And Abraham, when he was called out to a place, he was in Chaldea as well, that he should receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out not knowing where he went. By faith he journeyed in the land of promises in a strange country, being willing to dwell in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob. Now Abraham was an exceedingly rich man. His father was a priest for Nimrod, like one of the officials in the court. He could have been as much a prince. By the time he got to Egypt, he was as rich as Pharaoh. Jacob was greater than Pharaoh. Israel blessed Pharaoh, meaning that the greater blesses the lesser, right? These were great, rich, wealthy princes of men, and yet they dwelt in tents rather than dwelling in Egypt, dwelling in Ur of Chaldees and having the luxuries of the day. Why? Because they're heirs of a promise. For he looked for a city which had foundations, whose builder and maker is God. And that's the same kind of thing he said of Moses. We'd already looked at that, was that, he could have been the son of Pharaoh's daughter, right? He could have been a prince, but he rather chose to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. What motivated them? Was it just religion and wanting to keep the commandments and be good people? No, that does not sustain you. That does not move you forward. That doesn't bring you forward to cause you to forsake everything and follow after something. No, what brings you forward is vision. And the prophets were God's spokesman to reveal the vision of his good pleasure, his kingdom, his heart. And Ezekiel, Daniel was a student of the prophecies, and he was quite familiar with what the holy, most holy meant. He was longing for this day. Wow, there's going to be this temple, and the Lord is going to set his foot on the Mount of Olives, and it's going to split, Well, he didn't have that vision yet. That's from Zechariah. But there's going to be this temple, and the water is going to come out and heal the nations, and it's going to be like Eden again. Of course he longs for that day. And that's what motivates us. We are strangers and pilgrims because we've seen a vision. Not just because there's a commandment that says don't love the world. There's no commandment that can make me not love the world. But if like I always say, I don't always say it, but if you take a kid to Disney World and you take him home, he's going to have plenty to say about Disney World. He won't be able to stop talking about how great Disney World is, and we saw this, we saw that, we saw this. Why? Because it's sensory overload. What God delights in is giving us a sensory overload, so to speak, of vision, a spirit of wisdom and revelation. And that's why Paul prayed that we would have a spirit of wisdom and revelation, that we would know what is the hope of his calling and what are the riches of the glory of his inheritance in the saints. Because God works in his people by vision, not by carrot and stick. Again, we are not dogs and slaves. Dogs, like I said, I kenneled the dogs again tonight. Do they have a vision that it's my dinner time and they want me to eat well and digest well and be at peace? No. They know if they go in the kennel, they get a treat. A slave, Jesus said, I don't call you slaves, I call you friends, because the slave doesn't know what his master is doing, but I tell you what I'm doing, therefore I call you friends. He lets us into his heart and says, this is what I'm wanting to do. Why? Because he wants to motivate us to move of our own volition, not have to lead us with, remember in the psalm he says, don't be like a horse where I have to lead you with a bridle. That's what the law is like. The law-keeping people who have no vision except all they see is the commandments, and God says, well, we got to do this, so therefore I got to do it. And they got no vision at all. No vision. Well, our purpose in looking at the prophecies is vision. And I was looking at some of those rapture channels. They were showing up on my feed today or yesterday. And I think it's because I'm doing these videos. So I'm looking at the various so-called watchmen, and all their titles are like, you know, it's about to hit the fan. There, it's coming. It's all bad news. There's not an ounce of vision in it. And I want to do everything I can to make sure that that's not what we're doing when we're studying prophecy. I want it to be focused on the inheritance and the good pleasure of God and what He's called us into and what we have to look forward to. We're inviting people to a wedding feast. You don't invite people to a wedding feast by telling them, you better get in there, the shit's about to hit the fan. You know, that's not how you get invited to a wedding. Usually the wedding invitation is really beautiful, and you open it up and it says, you are cordially invited to celebrate the matrimony of so-and-so and such. They met here, and they're going to be married here, and it's going to be a star-studded gala, and we're having this music and that. No, we are inviting people to a feast. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Okay, so let's get back to Daniel. So that's what it means, though, to anoint the most holy. That the end, he's saying you have 490 years until the most holy is anointed. And maybe that was disappointing for Daniel. Maybe he thought, if we could get this temple erected, maybe we could anoint the most holy before I die and get this thing going. Nope. In this vision, he finds out some bad news. You know, it is true that in Daniel's prophecies, he got sick because some of the visions he saw, because they all showed him that there was a lot of history left to fulfill before this would all be done. And not only that, but he had to seal up the vision in the prophecy because the time was not yet. And that grieved his heart and made him heart sick. You can imagine why. But we are the people upon whom the end of the age has come. And we'll establish that by the time we're done with this all. I guess we'll see that this is the hour. We are living in that hour. So verse 25, know therefore and understand. So we know there's this commandment to go forth and rebuild Jerusalem, and the street shall be built in troublous time. Now this is a mathematical calculation. The commandment to restore and rebuild Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. And I pulled up Missler's notes, which I'll put in the description. Again, I cannot recommend him as a teacher for the Christian life because he taught Galatian error, and I didn't realize it at the time. But he sure did make prophecy fun, and he sure did make the Bible exciting. I don't think he was always Galatian error. I think he got into it later, and I think it had to do with the influences that were around him. And it just teaches me that we need to guard and always really guard our crown and not let anybody steal it. And we need to make sure we avoid the error of Balaam and avoid compromise. He compromised to be affiliated with certain people and to not offend certain people. And that will lead you down a road where eventually your doctrine changes as well. But I just wanted to do this. He has a thing about the 69 weeks. Artaxerxes, only the last one was, there were 4 commands, right? But the one in Nehemiah 2, 5 through 8, in 445 BC, there was a command to rebuild the city, the walls, and that one is broken up for some reason into 7 plus 62, but it's for a total of 69 weeks, which is 483 years, all right? And it begins with the commandment to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, including the wall and the street, and ends at this event called the Messiah the King. The prediction is to the presentation of the Messiah the King, and the Gid was first used of King Saul, he says. On several occasions in the New Testament, when they attempted to take Jesus as a king, he declared, my hour is not yet come. And he gives some scriptures for that. I will look at one of them. Why not? John 6:15. When therefore Jesus perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed again into a mountain by himself alone, because they'd seen this great miracle he did, and they said, this is a prophet that's come to the world, let's go make him a king. John 7:30. They sought to take him, but no man laid hands on him, because his hour was not yet come. Right? And they're all saying, look, this has to be the Christ. No one could do the kind of miracles that he's done. They want to make him king. John 7:44. Some of them would have taken him, but no man laid hands on him. And he's got some others, but then one day he says he arranges it. Now this story shows up in all 4 of the Gospels, and this is called Palm Sunday, which even the Catholics celebrate that, but that's when he comes in riding a donkey. And he arranged to do it on the exact day that can be calculated from Daniel's prophecy. And he expected that the Pharisees, who spent all their time calculating how many steps you could take before we're allowed to stone you on the Sabbath, they should have spent their time calculating when is Messiah coming, because Daniel gave them the day. Luke 19 is the one that is particularly poignant. Jesus entered and passed through Jericho, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. We know that. Okay, let me skip forward down. Sorry. I'll try to edit and clean some of this up. Okay. He said, when he had thus spoken, he went therefore ascending up to Jerusalem. Oh, check this out. Oh, no. Okay. And it came to pass. Yeah, disregard that. And it came to pass, when he was come to Bethpage and Bethany, called at the Mount of Olives, there he was again at the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples, saying, go you into the village over against you, and at which entering you shall find a colt tied. Thereon there's never a man sat. Loose him and bring him there. And if a man asks you, why'd you loose him? Thus shall you say to him, because the Lord has need of him. Now check this out. This is examples. If you read the Gospels, one of the things you want to be impressed with is that the Father, this is what predestination is. Predestination is the Father's working in history to make sure that every single detail is there, so that every step one of his sons take, is working out for their good to fulfill his will. It is not predestination unto your salvation, like he chose you to be saved and chose that guy not to be saved. No. We choose to believe, okay, based on the revelation that he's given us in the Word and the Gospel. We choose to not harden our heart or to harden it, okay? But we don't harden our heart to the Gospel, and as we don't, more light comes and more light comes until we finally receive it. And it is with divine assistance, but he put the Word in place. He put the Gospel out there. He brought people our way. He got people praying for us. But he knew who we were as his sons. And he arranged when we would live and where we would live. That's all part of predestination. And then, in the space and time we lived, he actually works every single event, every single second into his plan, so that all of our days are written in his book. And Jesus, when you read the Gospels, pay attention to that. Just try to look at them in the light of God's sovereignty, and you will see, oh my gosh, literally every day, wherever the Lord walked, the Father had pre-planned the whole thing. And so everything that Jesus did was, he was walking into a situation that was prepared for him. And we should have that kind of view of our life, because Ephesians says that we are his workmanship, created for good works, which he has prepared for us to walk in. We think, oh, I need to go do works. No. Your walk. We used to walk according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that operates in the sons of disobedience. But now, as we're being renewed and learning to walk worthy of our calling, because we've been raised up and seated in the heavenly places with Christ, and we are co-heirs together with him, accepted in the beloved, and sons of the Father, members of the body of Christ. As we put on Christ and we learn who we are in him, and that we're accepted in him, and we are a fragrance of Christ unto God, and that we can approach him boldly, we discover that all things are working together for our good. It's part of our faith. And we discover that everything in our life is there's no accidents. And every situation you walk into has been prepared by the Father beforehand to train you, to give you the wisdom you need, to shape you into the person, into the vessel that he's going to have you be to dispense his life. Jesus' whole life was a preparation. Hebrews says that he learned obedience through the thing. Though he was a son, he learned obedience through the things he suffered. Did you know that Jesus was disciplined by the Father? See, we think discipline is for your sins because you were naughty, but Jesus was trained. He learned obedience through the things he suffered. That's in Hebrews 2. Why don't people ever talk about that when they talk about discipline? No, the discipline is the Father's training of his sons by using everything in their environment and weaving it into the tapestry of his perfect plan. And when you see this, he's able to say, go into the village over against you, in which you'll find a colt tied that's no man's ever sat on it. What a coincidence, right? Loose him and bring him here. And if any man asks you, why do you loose him? You'll just say, because the Lord has need of it. And they won't give you any resistance. Really? Why? Because it's all prepared for the Lord. It's the same kind of thing when Peter said, they're asking if you're going to pay taxes. And he's like, well, do the sons of the kingdom have to pay taxes, or are they the heirs? No, we shouldn't have to pay taxes. Right. So Jesus sitting there at the table, he's like, yeah, right, exactly. But, so we don't offend them, go and catch the first fish you find. First fish you catch, there's going to be a silver coin in its mouth, and use that to pay our taxes. Now, did he magically create the coin? Or was it that the Father arranged it so that when Peter cast his line, the first fish he ended up grabbing had a coin in it that was maybe 100 years old, that it had gotten from the bottom of the sea 2 months earlier or whatever? That's the level of detail that the Father is working, and it'll strengthen your faith if you read the Gospels looking at and saying, I'm a son of God. And the level of detail that God spent paying attention to the firstborn, with the same love he loves me, and Christ is head over all things to the church, and the Father has worked all things according to the counsel of his will for my life, and he's working everything according to his foreknowledge for my good. Predestination in that light is beautiful. It doesn't mean he violated your will and you didn't choose to believe, but once you believe, you become a part of something that was planned from the foundation of the world. He knew who you were and worked it out accordingly. Okay, and anyway, he says, they that were sent went their way and found even as he said to them. There was the colt. Oh, what a coincidence, right? And as they were loosing the colt, the owner, sure enough, said, why you loose the colt? And they said, the Lord has need of him. No problem. They brought him to Jesus, and they cast their garments on the colt, and Jesus sat on it. And as he went, they spread their clothes in the way. When he was come nigh, even at the descent of the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice, and for all the mighty works that they had seen, saying, blessed is the King, this is Mashiach Nagid, that comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest. Now this is the first time he's letting them call him king. This is where Missler said, not only did they tried to make him a king, but he said, my hour has not come. This time he arranged to fulfill a prophecy, because this is the fulfillment of prophecy in Zechariah 9:9, right? I'm sure you guys know that, but why not? See if there's a cross-reference. Zechariah 9:9, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king comes to thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding on an ass, and upon a colt and a foal of an ass. This is him coming in his humiliation. See, the prophets had two line of prophecies, to where that even some of the Jewish scholars believed that there were two messiahs. One was this exalted king, and one was a lowly servant. Because they couldn't figure out that it was the same person in some cases. But there's this aspect where Peter said they were inquiring into the sufferings of the Christ and the glories to follow, and there's this line of prophecies concerning him coming as the lowly, meek one who said, my burden is light, I'm meek and lowly in heart, come to me, you'll find rest for your soul if you're weary and heavy laden. And that's who we come to. He is the lowly one now, and we come to him but he's also the Lion of the tribe of Judah, right? But he arranged to fulfill Zechariah 9:9 deliberately on the day that Daniel prophesied. And some of the Pharisees from among the multitude said to him, "Rebuke thy disciples." So they knew what the significance of this event was. And he said, "I tell you that if these should hold their peace, the stones would immediately cry out." In other words, this is sovereign of God. This is supernatural. This is history. This is the purpose of history. This is the purpose of creation, that this is happening. But then when he come near, he beholds the city and wept over it. He said, "If only you had known, even thou, at least in this thy day, because this is their day, the things which belong to your peace, but now they are hid from thine eyes. For the day shall come upon thee that your enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee around, and keep thee in on every side, and shall lay thee even with the ground, and your children within thee, and they shall not leave one stone upon another, because you knew not the time of your visitation." The Pharisees should have known the day of their visitation. He said these things are hidden from your, which belong to your peace. Now, what he's saying is that they've been cut off. And Paul said in Romans 11:25, "Behold, I show you a mystery, that partial blindness has come upon Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. Then all Israel should be saved, as it is written, out of Zion shall come the deliverer, for this is my covenant with them, when I shall turn away sin and ungodliness from Jacob," which is the new covenant. But at this point, they're hardened, and they can't see anymore. And that's not talking about Jews individually, because all the new believers in the early church were Jews in Jerusalem, but the nation. And remember, we talked about at the beginning of this, God deals with the nation and individuals. And as a nation, they were blinded. Their national leadership was blinded, and Israel, as a branch, ceased to be serviceable to God. And he was no longer going to deal with them as a nation. Going forward, you were a believer in Christ, and if you were a believer that believed through his death and resurrection, you were baptized into the body of Christ, in which there's no Jew or Greek, but Christ is all in all. However, we know the first event on the earth during Daniel's 70th week is the sealing of the 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes that are known as Israelites, right? As the servants of God during that time to preach the gospel of the kingdom. But the enemies casting the trench around thee, encompassing thee around, and keeping thee on every side is the siege that he prophesied at the beginning of Matthew 24, saying every stone will be, not one stone will be left upon another, and thy children within thee, they'll not leave one stone upon another, because you knew not the time of the visitation. This was the worst siege in the history of Israel's time, maybe. Is really bad, and a lot of people believe that this was so bad that this fulfills the tribulation. That this is the end of the age that Jesus was talking about in 70 AD, but no, that's not it. There's more history to unfold, right? But the reason was because they missed the day of their visitation. And there's a parallel verse in Mark that I think is real interesting. In Luke, he goes into the temple and casts everybody out, and the money changers and everything. But in Mark, remember, the Gospels aren't necessarily chronological. They're grouped in how the Holy Spirit ordered the story to bring out certain details. And then to put a chronology together, you have to kind of compare them all. But in Mark 11, after he entered into Jerusalem, it says he doesn't have the conversation with the Pharisees, and there's no record of him weeping over the city. But it says, Jesus entered into Jerusalem and into the temple, and when he looked around about all things, and now evening was come, he went out to Bethany with the 12. That is so anticlimactic. I love that, because this is the day he presented himself as a king, but this is in Mark, where he's the servant. He's identified with the ox, and everything is focused on him being a servant and serving the people. And he's not presenting himself as the king, but to do good and heal those who are sick and to serve. But it's a poignant scene where it doesn't have him weeping over Jerusalem as a prophet, but he just goes into the Jerusalem and he looks around in the temple, and there's nothing waiting for him. It's the ultimate anticlimax, right? Because this day, he said the very rocks would cry out if these people didn't cry out, meaning that this day is so important in history that the creation is waiting for it. And yet, when he goes into the temple, he finds no one waiting for him to crown him, nothing. It's like showing up. This is his coronation day. Literally, this should have been his coronation day, Messiah the King. But the point is, they missed it, and that's why they were cut off. Okay, and it happened on the 10th of Nisan. Jesus fulfilled it. Let's see, and he does the calculations in here. Does he do it in the notes? No, I think somewhere in his notes he actually goes through all the calculations to show that this is exactly 178,330 days from the going forth of the commandment. And it's based on Robert Anderson's notes, and that Clarence Larkin thing that I gave you guys the other day covered that. Okay, but good enough. We get the point. You can do that homework if you want. I don't feel like dealing with it. Other people are good at that kind of stuff. Okay, so going back to the prophecy then. He says, from this time to Mashiach Nagid shall be 69 weeks, 483 years, and then the clock stops. Why? Why the clock stop? Because partial blindness has happened to Israel, and they won't see him again until they say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. In Luke 13, he says, behold, your house is left to you desolate. Verily I say to you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And in Matthew 23, he says the same thing. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you that kill the prophets and stone them that are sent to thee. How often would I have gathered your children together, even as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you would not? Behold, your house is left to you desolate. For I say to you, you shall not see me henceforth till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And Chuck Missler always said, pay attention to until. The word until always means that something's going to happen to change. There's a status quo, and then until, and something's going to change, which means that there's another event, right? So it's not your house is left to you desolate, period. It's not your house is left to you desolate, period. You will not see me henceforth, period. It is your house is left to you desolate, and you will not see me henceforth until you say to me, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. And there is a day when they will say that, because in their affliction they will seek him early. And this is talking about in the time of Jacob's trouble in the tribulation, when they will be left with no recourse but to seek the Lord in truth, and he will reveal himself to them, as Zechariah says, they shall see me who they have pierced, and they will mourn for him. He longs to gather Jerusalem under his wings in a maternal way. He's not angry at them the way you think, forever. But their house is desolate because they missed the day of their visitation. Daniel 9. Okay, so we're back to Daniel 9. And he says, after the 69 weeks he shall be cut off. The clock stops. Then the people and the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Well, he just talked about that. I tell you, not one stone will be left upon another. Why? Because you missed the day of your visitation. And the end hereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. Okay, so now this section is the beginning of a period of time. It's an unspecified interval. We know there's an interval between this time and the beginning of the 7-year period called the 70th week, the last week, which has, as I said in the last session, 2/3 of the Bible is written about the events that happened during the 70th week. There's more Bible scriptures describing the events of the 70th week than any other time in human history. But there's also a lot of scriptures that tell us from the Old Testament prophecies that talk about how because they rejected their Messiah, they will be scattered throughout the nations, and they will be cursed, and they'll wander around the nations, and the land will be desolate. And the city after the city and sanctuary is destroyed during this interval time. What's secret is the church. What is a mystery about this interval is that Christ will build his church during this time. That part is not revealed until the New Testament. But we do know that the prophets understood that there was an interval to some degree. They understood, even from Daniel, that, okay, Messiah is going to be cut off, and then they're going to destroy the city and the sanctuary again. And then there's this flood of desolation that's determined. And Ezekiel and Zechariah and others prophesied that they would again be scattered throughout the nations. This must have been so disheartening for the prophets who longed for the city whose builder and maker is God, to realize that there was this huge, still so many things that had to come to pass. You know, the prophetic word was not always encouraging to them because it slowed down the sense of imminency. That's the thing, is that the prophetic word does not necessarily agree with imminency. And one of the things that the rapture channels do is they take away the imminency of the rapture by insisting that there are signs that precede it, right? They say, oh, well, when the bombs come down, then we go up, or, well, when you see this, or, and then this is going to happen, and then what they're doing is they're actually forestalling the rapture and saying, well, that can't happen until this happens, and this can't happen until that happens, which wears out the saints. But then also they keep seeming to promise the rapture, and then it doesn't happen, and that wears out the saints too. But we are not on a prophetic timeline for the rapture. It's imminent, meaning it could happen at any moment. And I take that as a blessing, because can you imagine living during Daniel's time, thinking at the beginning when he's praying, okay, we're going to go back to the land. If the 70 years are up, our salvation is upon us. And Gabriel comes rushing to him and panting, and taps him on the shoulder and gives him this prophecy. And as he starts to think about it, he discovers, oh my Lord, there's 490 years left, and there's a gap between the 483rd and the 409 and the last 7 years of an unspecified period of time, and the Messiah is going to be cut off, and the city and the sanctuary is going to be destroyed again? Are you kidding me? Prophecy brings disappointment to prophets, because it just tells them, oh, it's that much longer, you know. So don't long to be a prophet. It's not that encouraging. I think in the next one, I'm going to put this up, and then give me feedback. Do you want me to go through and show some of the prophecies about Messiah being cut off and Israel being cast? Do you guys know the prophecies about Jesus being from the Old Testament? That's something you should know, because he died for our sins according to the Scriptures. And you should be able to present all this from the Old Testament. That's how we can prove that the Bible is real to people, is to show them that all of this was in the Old Testament Scriptures before the New Testament was ever written. So you can't say that a bunch of New Testament guys conspired to make up these stories that the Jews rejected. God uses the hardness of the Jews to vindicate the New Testament, because all the prophecies are in the Old Testament, you know, and the Jews rejecting them just shows that, you know, they're in the disobedience that God prophesied. And if you can explain this from their own Scriptures, it's a pretty airtight argument concerning the integrity of the Word. And I know a lot of people really love to get people into prophecy, and so they want to give them a teaching. Oh, you got to listen to this guy. Here's 90 minutes in. Don't do that. See if you can wade through some of this and actually present it. People will listen to you that aren't going to listen to a video you send them. The purpose of this stuff is to equip the saints so that they can share, you know. But I'll put the link to Missler's thing in there. I'm going to give it a rest now because I'm kind of tired of talking. All right, take care.